I think all of us as parents do wonder about what's going on inside that little head. What are the changes that are happening? How will this little creature eventually begin to make sense of the world?
So today we're here with Pawan Sinha. He's a professor in the brain and cognitive sciences at MIT, and he's an expert in vision. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mariella.
So let's start with a question related to the history of your field. And we'll just start with the 1981 Nobel Prize given out in medicine and physiology for vision. And with that prize, they concluded that there is a critical period for vision in childhood. And could you explain at that point how they got to that conclusion in rough ideas?
Yeah, the work you mentioned is a really remarkable body of research. This is work by David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel, and work from their postdoctoral advisor, Stephen Kufler. So what Kufler and Hubel and Wiesel were interested in finding out is the mechanism by which we do vision, the response properties of cells in the retina and in the visual cortex. And what they found were a very interesting set of results showing that we are not just detecting spots of light or regions of light, but we are doing some interesting computations on those regions of light, like detecting edges and other simple features. But the specific results that you mentioned of the consequences of visual deprivation on the response properties of the brain, that was work that Hubel and Wiesel conducted with kittens. And what they found was that if you have a normally sighted kitten who is constrained to view the world only through one eye for a few months, right after birth. So you close one eyelid, and now this kitten is going around experiencing the world with only one eye open. What Hubel and Wiesel found, quite surprisingly, is that even when you now open the temporarily shut eye, and the eye looks perfectly fine, so now the kitten has two normal-looking eyes, yet the kitten behaves as if it's functionally blind in the eye that was temporarily closed. And no matter how long this kitten now experiences the world with both eyes open, it continues to behave as if its vision from the closed eye, from the temporarily closed eye, is essentially non-existent. When Hubel and Wiesel looked at the correlates in the brain of this deprivation, of this monocular deprivation, they found that the brain's visual processing machinery, the cells that do visual processing, had been co-opted almost entirely by the open eye, and the closed eye had essentially lost its foothold to the neural resources. And this seemingly could not be undone with extensive post-deprivation experience. And this led to the idea that maybe those early few months were a critical period during which time the brain requires normal visual input from both eyes in order to develop normal processing mechanisms.
And then in some ways this study and this work really motivated you in your own work as you became an expert in this field of vision. Before we get into the details of your own work, can we maybe give people a broad idea of how does vision work? Just if, and especially focusing on as a baby is born and thinking about that time period as well.
Yeah, so the question of how vision works, this is one of the still largely unsolved problems of science. It's a huge, big problem.
That's exciting for scientists.
Very exciting for scientists to have a big problem to devote one's life to. There's a very interesting quote from a person considered the father of American psychology, William James, who, in describing a newborn's sensory experience, said that the newborn is essentially experiencing a blooming, buzzing confusion.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that my lab and many other labs are animated by is in trying to understand how this blooming, buzzing confusion, this complex chaos of lights and sounds and tactile sensations, how that gets resolved into a meaningful world.
Yeah.
And that's essentially, it connects to the question you posed. How do we get to do vision?
Mm-hmm.
So we are looking at that from the perspective of development.
Mm-hmm.
How do we learn to do vision? Not just how we do vision as adults. So we want to understand what are the very initial steps by which the brain begins to make sense of the environment that it's placed in. As I said, most of the big insights to this question are still to be discovered.
Yeah. And over the course of your career, you've had even a funny moment where you had a son and your son played a role in your own studies. Can you just
Yes.
mention that sidetrack of
Indeed,
what happened?
It's a story very dear to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
So we had our son about 19 years ago. He's now a sophomore at MIT. But when he was born, given my interest in visual development, I saw him, his name is Darius. So I saw Darius, baby Darius, as a very interesting avenue by which I could explore questions of development.
Yeah.
And to my surprise, somewhat, Pam, my wife, was completely opposed to the idea of me conducting any scientific studies with Darius. But I still felt that this is quite literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He's our only child. So I wanted to derive some scientific insights through Darius. So what I did was to attach a small camera to his forehead, and I recorded Darius's visual experience for the world as a baby. So the world through a baby's eyes, somewhat.
So if your lab's studying that, that's the risk of having a father who's a scientist studying vision, and especially in that period of being a baby.
It's very tempting. And I think all of us as parents do wonder about what's going on inside that little head. What are the changes that are happening? How will this little creature eventually begin to make sense of the world? And I think that in the hands of a scientist translates into some specific studies.
Yeah, and through those recordings, you got to see the world through your son's eyes, and not too many parents have that opportunity.
That's right. And I think it's a really interesting gift offered to a child who, say, when he or she is a teenager, for them to see what were those initial weeks and months like.
Right.
So I think both from the perspective of science and from the perspective of a given person, it's a nice record
nice to have that. Yeah. And then in your work, you think about vision and studying the blindness as well. And so we want to understand what causes blindness or how blindness works. And so could you give just a broad overview of blindness and the types of blindness that there is?
Absolutely. And just to connect blindness with our work. So the backstory as to how we got interested in blindness is a story of serendipity. On a trip to India, when I was visiting my father.
That's where you grew up?
That's where I grew up. And my father lived in New Delhi. So one winter evening, as I was going from my father's house to a friend's house in a cab, the cab stopped at a traffic light. And I noticed by the side of the road, two little children and their mother, dressed barely in rags. And it was such a cold day, and like anybody, I felt badly, and I called over the mother to give her some money. She came over, and holding on to her sari, both children, who to my eyes were about 6 or 7 years old, they came over as well. And as I was giving the mother the money, I looked down at the children, and I noticed that both of them were blind, and they were blind because of cataracts. And we'll talk about cataracts in a moment. But in that moment, seeing two little children who already are having to deal with the deprivations of poverty to also have to deal with the challenge of blindness,
Right.
that just seemed to viscerally wrong. So that image of blind children stayed with me, and I did some researching into, is this just a rare instance that I've observed, or is this the tip of the proverbial iceberg?
And before that, you didn't study work with blindness at all?
No. Our lab was more a computational lab, and the experimental work we were doing was with normally sighted individuals.
This was clearly a pivotal moment then.
It was, and that's why I say serendipity played such an important role. The more I looked at the logs of, or the registries of blindness and data from the government of India and from the World Health Organization, the more I realized just how big of an issue this was in the developing world, certainly for India, but for many other countries in the global south.
How many children are impacted by blindness in India versus the United States?
Yeah, interestingly enough, there aren't any very good population-based studies of the extent of blindness. But tragically, childhood blindness is so strongly correlated with childhood mortality that people have tried to estimate the extent of blindness from the extent of mortality statistics. And those estimates put the number of blind children somewhere in the range of 1 million or so.
Wow.
That's the sad part of the story. But the more optimistic part of the story is that a sizable proportion of these children actually have treatable conditions.
Yeah.
So when I mention cataracts, I used to think about cataracts as an old age related condition.
Right. Most people probably have that experience of knowing a grandparent with cataracts.
Once you are, say, past 75 or 80, then you begin to develop some cloudiness of your lens, and you can go in for a fairly straightforward surgery and get that lens replaced. But it turns out that children can be born with cataracts. Certain kinds of maternal infections during pregnancy can lead to the development of cataracts while the fetus is in the womb. And
you said you could see this when the children approach the taxi. So what does that look like when you see cataracts?
Yeah, so cataracts is, the term means an opacity of the lens. So your lens and mine, they are beautifully transparent. We can't actually see our lenses for normally sighted individuals.
Yeah.
So the pupil looks black. Essentially, we're seeing the inside of the eye through the pupil. It's just a hole, even though that pupil is sitting in front of a lens. A child with a cataract has an opaque lens, and this opaque lens appears white. So for a child with a cataract, you would see, instead of a black pupil, you would see a white pupil. So it's, even to an untrained eye, it's quite easy to detect.
So that's why you knew in that moment.
In that moment, yes. So it's a condition that's easy to detect and fairly easy to treat as well, because the surgery is in principle the same as the surgery that we as adults would undergo. A small incision in the cornea, removal of the opaque lens, and insertion of a clear plastic lens.
And really this can be done in hours, and the same day they're in and out of the medical.
Yes. Pediatric surgeries are a little more involved than adult surgeries. Adult surgeries can be done with local anesthesia. You don't need to go fully under.
Yeah.
With children, because of the concerns about movement during surgery, the child has to be completely under general anesthesia. But even given that, it's a fairly straightforward surgery as surgeries go.
Yeah.
So for that 30 minutes or an hour of surgery, you stand to completely transform a blind child's life. So seeing that there were many children who had this condition, and also realizing that this is a fairly straightforward condition to treat, I felt that we ought to be doing something about it. But in thinking about doing something about it from the humanitarian perspective, I also realized that in bringing sight to children who have been born blind, we would have a very interesting way forward for the scientific question that we had been trying to grapple with.
Yeah.
Trying to understand what are the very initial stages of visual development. So a child who transitions from blindness to sight, say at the age of 10 years, right after the bandages are opened after the surgery, from those very first minutes, you have a ringside seat onto the process of visual development.
And this ties back to the initial Nobel Prize work and thinking, someone may have told you at that time, it's not worth studying that question because the child that has a surgery, even if you did remove the cataract, it was too late.
That's right. Yeah. Having grown up with that literature, I myself was not entirely convinced that these surgeries would be worth even the minimal risk that a cataract surgery presents. So we weren't certain that the outcomes of these surgeries would provide adequate benefits to make them worth it. But we decided that it's worth taking a chance because most of the data until that point had come from animals, from non-human subjects, and we would ideally want to have an understanding of how does the human brain respond to deprivation. Furthermore, because most of the data until that point had come from non-human subjects, the scope of the studies that can be done and the kinds of aspects of vision that can be probed, say with the kitten or even with the monkey, that's fairly limited.
Yeah.
And the kinds of aspects of vision that we would want to study, they were largely not understood.
Yeah.
How would the human brain respond to such treatment?
You can't ask a cat, what do you see?
That's right. That's right. So for those reasons, we felt that if we were very careful about completely mitigating any surgical risks, it would be worth exploring what would be the outcomes of these treatments.
So walk us through how you went from that moment in the cab, but then you decided, okay, there's a humanitarian need, but there's also the scientific questions that haven't been answered. How did you put it all together going forward in your career?
Yeah, so that process, I think MIT deserves a lot of credit for facilitating that process. And NIH, the National Institutes of Health, the federal biomedical research funding body, that deserves a lot of credit. And the reason I say that is, in order for the germ of an idea, such as this one, to get off the ground, you need an initial bit of encouragement and an initial bit of resources to see whether there's any merit to this idea. And MIT provided that kind of initial encouragement and an initial seed grant for me to be able to explore, is what I'm thinking about, is that even feasible in principle?
Right.
So with the seed grant from the MIT International Science and Technology Initiative, MISTI, I was able to convince myself by traveling around the country that this is indeed a big problem, and we could potentially put together a mechanism for identifying such children in the villages and then bringing them to New Delhi to a surgical center to provide them care and then studying their post-operative outcomes. With that initial proof of concept or that initial set of data that this might be feasible, I then applied to NIH, specifically to the National Eye Institute, which is a subcomponent of NIH, with some trepidation, because essentially what I was asking NEI for was support for a project that would be conducted largely in a different country, and it would benefit children in that foreign country. But what I tried to convince the reviewers was that the scientific insights that would flow out of this work would not be beholden to any political boundaries. It would be science that belongs to all of humanity. And NIH, to their eternal credit, they responded very favorably to this proposal. They gave us what's referred to as an R21 grant, which is an exploratory grant. It's a 2-year grant that allows you to demonstrate feasibility and get some initial results.
Yeah, because at that time you didn't know if what you were proposing to study really was worth it.
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Would the outcomes be worth the surgical logistics and risks? So with that initial grant support, we were able to demonstrate that there's some merit to this work. And then NIH came in and supported us more extensively through a project grant called an R01 grant.
Yeah, and when you had signs of things turning out to work in the favor of it's worth doing the cataract surgery, what were those early results? Like, how would you test if for a child they're able to gain sight back even though they were out of that critical period that was described earlier?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so there are some observations that are just so self-evident that even without doing scientific studies, you see that the child is benefiting from this. So anecdotes like you see a child come into the hospital and they require other people's help even to cross the road from one side to the other.
Right.
But then in a matter of a couple of weeks after the surgery, they are running around the hospital corridors on their own, and you see a change in their demeanor. They look happy. They're able to navigate on their own. They're able to begin to recognize people. All of those anecdotal observations are already indicating that the child has benefited.
And they don't have to be able to describe to you what they're able to see or do.
That's
you
right.
can just watch.
Observing their behavior. Very powerful. But in order to convince ourselves that we are not just wearing rosy glasses and seeing hallucinating benefits just because we want them to have those benefits, we also needed to do rigorous scientific studies. So over the past several years, we've conducted studies that have examined a whole range of visual functions. Low-level visual functions like just the ability to resolve patterns in the environment. So the kinds of eye tests that all of us, I'm sure, have done, like reading a letter chart. That's a very simple kind of visual function. But then also more complex ones, like looking at an image and saying, how many objects do you see in there? What are those objects? Can you tell, are these faces? Are these non-faces? Can you catch a ball that's thrown to you? How accurate are those movements? So across many of these dimensions, what we observe is that the children exhibit remarkable progress from the preoperative to the postoperative state.
And in this case, you have human subjects now, so you're able to talk to them, you're able to do these experiments, record them, and really go at a research level to determine results.
Absolutely.
I know with the identifying two objects, you realized there was a critical sort of factor that played into seeing two objects for these post-surgery children versus when it was just asked looking at a screen.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting finding to my mind. And it points to an important cue that we as visual observers pick up from the environment. So the finding that you're referring to is the following. Let's say I show you two isolated objects, no overlap. Let's say one of them is a circle and the other is a square. I show them to you and I ask you, how many objects do you see? You would be able to say two objects, a square and a circle. Now imagine that I overlap these two objects. So there's a partial overlap. The square is partly overlapping the circle. And these are line drawings. You would still be able to say, okay, still two objects, a circle and a square, but with some overlap. What we noticed with the Prakash children, we call this Project Prakash. Prakash is Sanskrit for light. What we noticed with the Prakash children is that while the objects were isolated, they could enumerate, okay, we see two objects, a square and a circle. But if these two objects were overlapping, then it was really puzzling to see that question of how many objects are there, they would now begin to see three objects. So the little segment of the circle, little segment of the square, and the overlap region all became distinct objects. And they were unable to recognize what these objects were. Mm-hmm. Even if you give the square and the circle different colors, so long as they're overlapping, the children are still confused about what they are. Yeah. But the crucial change that comes about in their perception happens with the introduction of dynamics, so time-varying imagery. If you now put these objects in motion, even though they don't lose their overlap, so they're never isolated, they are moving around while overlapping, that movement seems to allow the visual systems of the Prakash children to begin to see that these are two distinct objects.
That really probably plays back to thinking about development of a baby. The world is not static, and not thinking about things in static. So, by chance in this lab study, you thought to add movement, or, your students you were working with thought to add movement as a factor in this.
So that, I think, is a crucial observation, that the world that we inhabit is a dynamic one. And the brain, not just the human brain, but all animal brains, seem to have figured out that the exploitation of these dynamics is a very efficient way for understanding which things go together and which things ought to be segregated from each other. Every animal visual system that has been studied has been found to have a sensitivity to dynamics. They might not have sensitivity to color information. They might not have sensitivity to stereo depth information. But motion sensitivity seems to be present in every animal model.
Including humans.
Including humans. And also to connect that to the point you mentioned, with babies, the studies that have been done with normally sighted infants indicate that sensitivity to motion is one of the very early onset abilities. So it's as if the brain is making use of how things change over time in order to begin to make sense of that blooming, buzzing confusion we talked about.
Yeah, so you refer to Project Prakash as you were answering the prior questions, and this is a nonprofit that you've established over the years accomplishing this work. So do you want to maybe give a summary of your accomplishments as part of starting this nonprofit? What has the nonprofit been able to achieve with working with children in India up to this point? And also maybe give a sense of how many years you've been running Project Prakash to date.
So Project Prakash is an effort that's very, very close to my heart and to the hearts of all of us in the lab who have been fortunate to be associated with it. We started Project Prakash, I think, about 21 years ago now. And over the course of this time, we have treated close to, I think, 530 blind children. Wow. We have provided non-surgical care to over 3,000 children. Wow. And we've provided ophthalmic screening to, I think, over 63,000 children. So it's been a very gratifying effort, which has allowed us to connect with a real-world problem while also feeling that we are advancing the fundamentals of science.
Yeah, as scientists, you don't always get to see the impact of results because you're working in a lab setting, and but you're really connecting those working in your lab to the outcome and results of, and working with the children that this work, nonprofit work, has been helping over the years.
Yeah, it's and that's why I said we're very fortunate to have this kind of opportunity to not only extend the frontiers of neuroscience, but also to see in the moment the impact of the little intervention that we are making. We hope, like all scientists do, that the knowledge that we are discovering will have its own impact in the years to come, but to feel that even in the moment, we are bringing some relief and some betterment to human lives. That's a very, very nice feeling to have.
Yeah, very rewarding part to see the whole picture with your work. I know that you've also had this work play into your education work at MIT, that you teach classes and you work with MIT undergrad students as well as your graduate students and postdocs. And recently you made a trip in January, this past January, with MIT students. Could you maybe explain what that experience was like for the students and what you aimed to do, but then really what results you saw out of having students go visit India and visit with these Prakash children as well?
Yeah, that was also a very, very nice experience for all of us, for all of the lab members, to see this group of undergraduates, to the trip that you mentioned, that was sponsored by MISTI, the entity I'd mentioned earlier, the MIT International Science and Technology Initiative. MISTI runs a program called the Global Classroom Program, with the intention of providing a global perspective to research and technology to our students. So as part of this program, 12 students out of a large collection who had applied, 12 students came with us to India for 2.5 weeks. They wanted to see firsthand the operations of Project Prakash, all aspects of Prakash, right from outreach, identifying children, to treatment, to post-operative studies. And the experience that they had, I think, was quite impactful. And the reason I believe that it was quite impactful is on the last day, so when their stay in India was coming to an end, and we asked them to reflect on the experiences there. Some of the students actually had tears in their eyes, and they emphasized the fact that with Project Prakash, they were able to see how basic research does not need to be divorced from tackling pressing problems in the moment. We don't, as scientists, always have to rely upon our work eventually leading to some benefits to human lives, but you can actually identify opportunities where you can be a basic scientist and also a do-gooder at the same time. And that, I think, was very powerful.
And these are undergraduates, so it may, impact their future choices of the career path they go on now.
Indeed. And some of the students who were upperclassmen, so juniors and seniors, they mentioned that they would have wanted to have this experience very early in their undergraduate tenure, so that it could shape the kinds of coursework that they do. And I think that's an important lesson for us, to expose our students to these kinds of opportunities from early on in their educational journeys, so they can begin to see how an MIT education can be furthered and can further real problems in the world.
Yeah, and typically they may not have that opportunity until their final year, and you have some signs that it's really worth trying to do this as early as possible for students and bringing that, and showing the key critical aspects of learning outside of the classroom.
Yeah, I think, again, thinking of this from a very personal perspective, what kinds of experiences would I want Darius to have at MIT? I think this kind of an experience of knowing what are the big problems in the world and how can an MIT education put you in a position to begin to think about solutions to those problems. I think that's a very valuable thing that we can do.
And some of your work, you've also worked on autism, and autism, maybe just give a brief explanation and description of what autism is, and then we can explain how the vision work ties to autism.
Absolutely. Autism is a neuropsychiatric condition that the CDC estimates affects about 1 in 37 children in the US, and the prevalence numbers across the world are also commensurate with this statistic. It's often described as a social challenge. An individual on the autism spectrum may find it difficult to look at people in the eyes, or to have an extended conversation with them, or to understand what they have in mind, something referred to as theory of mind, what's going on inside your conversation partner's mind, and how you should regulate your own conversation based on what you infer their state of mind to be. These kinds of things prove to be challenging for individuals on the autism spectrum. But besides the social correlates of autism, there are also other aspects to the condition, things like sensory hypersensitivities. Many individuals on the autism spectrum find it hard to tolerate repeating sequences, whether in sound or in vision. In fact, some autistic children find it hard to be in a room that has fluorescent lights. And it's a mystery why that is. When people have studied whether autism leads to a change in the basic sensory sensitivities of, say, the eye or the ear, they find that there aren't any very strong data supporting that. And yet, it's undeniable that there are reports of sensory hypersensitivities. Similarly, on the spectrum, a person might find it hard to do things like play ball in a playground. So the simple act of catching a ball turns out to be puzzlingly hard. The simple act of crossing a road and avoiding traffic, that turns out to be pretty hard. Autistic individuals find it hard to drive. So it's a complex phenotype.
Right.
Many different behaviors seem to be impacted. What led us to think about autism is the fact that some of the results that we were getting from Project Prakash in the visual domain seemed to be quite reminiscent of what I had read about visual changes associated with autism. Specifically, there was this one result of overfragmentation. So overfragmentation refers to, if I were to show you an image and I were to ask you, what are the objects in this image? And let's say it's an image of a natural scene. You would have no difficulty at all outlining the different objects. The Prakash children, and to some extent autistic children who are believed to be normally sighted, they tend to overfragment the world. So regions of different colors, different brightnesses, they get their own status as objects.
More complex than a normal sighted child.
Right. So the image is being broken up into too many pieces.
Right.
It's kind of like disassembling a scene into many little jigsaw pieces and then not seeing how these pieces cohere into one object percept. So that superficial similarity in the visual behavior of the newly sighted children and what I'd read about autistic children, that led us to wonder whether there might be some more substantial link to be made between these two conditions. What we were seeing with the Prakash children was that over time, over a matter of a few weeks or a few months, the Prakash children would eventually overcome this tendency to break up an image into too many pieces. And the primary cue, and this is something that we alluded to earlier, the primary cue that seemed to be allowing them to learn how to overcome overfragmentation was motion.
Yeah.
The appreciation of the temporal information in sequences. So the tentative hypothesis we toyed with is that if there were to be some compromise in processing dynamic information, could that then lead to challenges in parsing an image into distinct parts? Could autism be associated with some kind of atypicality in processing dynamic information? With that very tentative hypothesis, we started working with autistic children, looking at what aspects of dynamic information processing might be affected, if any. And what we found is that it's not the mere detection of dynamics. It's not seeing is something moving or not, but rather the prediction of what's going to happen next. So based on the information that you have seen so far, predict what's going to happen in the next second or next 2 seconds.
And that ties to what you see with autistic children. You were saying is a challenge to receive a ball that's coming.
That's right. Yeah. The simple act of catching a ball actually draws upon prediction in a very big way. Based on what you've seen of the trajectory of the ball, you need to bring your hands in the right position at the right time in order to be prepared to catch the ball. You can't react to the ball. If you are waiting to bring your hands together when the ball is almost at you, then you're too late. Similarly, to be able to cross a busy road, you need to be able to predict what's going to happen, say, 2 or 3 seconds from now.
The speed of the cars coming and how many are coming.
So that basic idea that maybe there might be a challenge to the dynamic prediction system of the brain, that then led us to formulate a hypothesis that we published some years ago, that autism might be associated with temporal prediction challenges. And that has led us and other labs to test this idea more rigorously with various studies. And we seem to find some significant support for this idea.
And this as well as ongoing work understanding more.
That's right.
And I think we can sort of loop this whole conversation back to the starting point and another lesson of your career that comes out from science. I think as scientists, we understand that one result is not the final answer, that it's worth pursuing, answering more questions. And usually one result just leads us to more questions. And you started this entire work with vision based on something where people would have told you at the time it's not going to work. So can you give your perspective of how science changes over time? And that is the normal pursuit of knowledge.
Absolutely. I think as scientists, we are obligated to challenge the status quo, and especially to be in a research-focused university like MIT. I think the university and all of the resources that support this university require us not to be satisfied, not to be just make incremental changes to a state of knowledge, but to ask questions that can change our thinking about received wisdom. In that spirit, I think Project Prakash has been pursuing ideas that one might have thought are completely settled, but we, as researchers, are always in the pursuit of new knowledge. And in this case, that pursuit has yielded some changes in how we think about, say, the notion of brain plasticity and how much plasticity is available later on. But I think stepping back, that general idea motivates me of trying to go beyond what I might have learned in textbooks and trying to see whether there is either a simplification of the ideas that have been proposed or maybe a change. And I feel that for me personally and for the students who I have the privilege of working with, that curiosity to always try to determine whether there is a better way to conceptualize the complexity of the world. I think that's a a very interesting pursuit, and it keeps us excited.
And driving motivation.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you want to learn more from Pawan about his work, as well as what he's teaching, you can go to learn.mit.edu to find more there. And I want to congratulate you on the impact of your work and the success of the Prakash project to date and continued success in the future. And thank you so much for being here today and joining us. And we will look forward to talking to you more because there's still so much more to learn from you.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. It's been such a pleasure to talk about a topic that's so dear to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.